Welcome to In Real Time, where we as Heights Church are inviting you in for real conversations about leading people, organizations, and change in the new normal. We're hoping that our real discussions about our church's journey will help you as you reimagine and rebuild yours. I'm Pastor Craig Sweeney, and I'm the lead pastor here at Heights Church, and I'm excited that you're with us today as we are at episode 1 of In Real Time, where we're having real conversations about leading people, organizations, and change. And I'm excited that you're with us, and I'm joined by my co-host today.
That's right.
Pastor Tim Layfield. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, even though I kind of already just
That's all good. Yeah, my name is Tim. I am one of the associate pastors here, and I oversee the online campus, as well as teaching pastor and manage a couple of the other ministries here at Heights, and it's exciting.
Yeah,
this podcast is exciting. Thanks for having me.
This has been about 6 years in the making. I was just reminded of that. 6 years ago, we started talking about this.
Yeah, and today is exciting because we get to talk about the why, like why this podcast or why what we do is important.
Yeah,
and because sometimes we get stuck, we don't know what the why is, and it's a good place to start.
Yeah. We figured, hey, this would be worth a whole episode. Why are you even doing this?
Yes.
Yeah, we think it's important.
Absolutely.
So when we think about the why, honestly, my mind keeps going back to a moment about 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I went through a year of chemo. And you weren't around for that. You came after those days. But when I went through that year of chemo, the last month of it, my whole body just crashed. I remember emotionally, spiritually, physically, I was an absolute mess. I didn't even know what words to use to describe where I had been, where I was at, found myself. Deep, dark hole came to mind. Hit a wall came to mind. Car wreck came to mind. Burnout, I think, probably is the best.
Sums it up.
Yeah, that's the one that sums it up. And the church gave me a gift. They gave me 6 weeks for a sabbatical. And I said, that's awesome. So I spent 10 days in the hospital trying to recover from this year of chemo. And I'm like, I am a disaster, and I have no idea how to rebuild. I didn't have a roadmap. I had nothing. And I had known no one who had gone through anything close to what I had been through. So I started scouring the internet, podcasts, anybody, asking, do you know anybody who's been through what I've been through? And honestly, I came across 2 conversations, and that was it. I know there's more out there, but I couldn't find them. So I found 2 conversations, though, of leaders that had been through something like me. Not the cancer piece, but the burnout, yes. And they talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh, yeah.
And so I began understanding what it was that I could expect. And I didn't need sunshines and rainbows. I needed the real story.
Yep.
And I began piecing then together what my recovery was going to look like. Because honestly, I wanted to make the most of that 6-week period.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back, and I wanted to be strong. You know what my plan was before I crashed and burned?
Just to come back or what?
Yeah, I this is how I was telling everybody. I was like in month 10, and I'm like, okay, this is how it's going to be. I'm running a marathon, and I'm going to sit down at the end of it, and I'm going to rest for 2 or 3 days. It's going to be great.
After all the chemo, after
all that, it's going to be awesome.
Body's depleted.
And then I'll be fine.
2 days.
I'll just join back in. You're like,
didn't work.
Idiot.
Yeah, it didn't work.
There's nothing even close to that. So I began to find these conversations. They were so helpful. And I think what was helpful about it is I began to really understand what it was going to take for me to come back. And I needed to hear the good, but I really needed to hear the bad and the ugly.
Yeah.
COVID or the pandemic that we've been through, this thing is truly earth-shattering.
Yeah.
In fact, my wife and I were at dinner with some people recently, and her and I have never been asked this question before, and her and I have not discussed it. But someone asked her, they said, hey, you've been through cancer. Your husband's been through cancer. What would you do? Would you do cancer, or would you do the pandemic again?
Oh, man.
My wife and I never discussed this. I had my answer. I didn't want to share it with her because I thought she won't agree with me. Her answer right away was, oh, I would do cancer all over again. I wouldn't do the pandemic. I'd do cancer.
Wow.
I was blown away. I looked at her and said, seriously? My answer is the same, but I had no idea that you would have that same response. And and I say that because I think leaders, we already know that this has been like a train wreck, like hitting a wall, like being in a big, deep, dark hole.
Yes.
It's like burnout.
Every day.
But it really has been as disruptive and actually more than we want to think it has been. It has truly changed the landscape around us. And we need to know that because there are some very difficult decisions that we need to make. There are permissions we need to give ourselves because it's been that disruptive. And when we can come to grips with it, I think we can actually lean into those permissions.
Right.
And so I feel compelled to help leaders to think about those permissions and to help think differently. Not because we know it all. Do we know it all?
No.
We don't know it all. No. But we've experienced good and we've experienced bad.
And the ugly.
And I think it's good for us to share it.
Yeah.
Because I've been looking for conversations of other leaders talking about the pandemic and how their churches are coming out of it, or how to even think about their work as the church now.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of them out there.
Nope.
I want to be able to create a conversation that people can listen to so that they can say, oh, the same.
Yep.
Or say, well, that's not us.
Right.
I would do it this way.
Yep.
Great. That's a good thing.
Right.
And that's where I found help in those conversations, those two, in my burnout. Well, as I've been going through this pandemic, I've been in many conversations with other pastors, and we've been sharing those stories. And there's been some times when I wish it could have been recorded and other people could have heard it.
Yeah.
Because I learned something from their good, bad, and ugly stories.
Yep.
They learned something from mine. So I think in all of this, we have just come to realize that we can do it. And that's what we want to build this podcast around, is in real time talking about how we're walking through whatever this next season and period of time is. And we want to share the good, the bad, and the ugly so that we can help other people.
Yeah.
And I think it's important also, and I feel like the Lord just kept putting this on my heart, that really our church is the perfect size, that 95% of churches, truthfully, can find it easier to scale our experience to theirs. Oftentimes when you hear leadership conversations, they're from much larger churches, and there's nothing wrong with that. I learn a lot from them. But when it comes to scaling our experiences and what we do with staffing, budgets, online, whether you do online, don't do online, what's going on with in person, there's a lot of things there that scale matters.
Yeah.
Size matters. And so when it comes to our church, we're a community of about 2,000, maybe a little more than that total, if everybody all came at once. And of course they don't.
That's right.
And then we're about that 1,000, 1,150, somewhere in that mark when it comes to our weekly gatherings. A lot of people can relate to these numbers. And so we want to be able to share our story so we can.
I think another important thing when we talk about the why is like, as you've done some research, like on Barna and things like that.
A lot of research.
We're finding like 43%, right? 43% of pastors over the last 12 months seriously thought about getting out.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
It is. And it's a staggering number when you consider that many have already gotten out.
Right.
So that last research happened in March. That means all the people who've already left have already left. And now the remaining group is sitting there at 43%.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you that those thoughts haven't run through my mind.
100%.
They have.
Right.
I haven't considered it longer than 30 seconds, but I understand it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important for me to be able to say, this is upheaval.
Yeah.
And that's why, as we're dealing with the pain of it all, it's important for us to hear some other people talk about it.
Absolutely.
And if we can help people with our real story, then I think that's something we're eager to do.
So let's as we are moving through this opener and we talk about the why, what are some of the things that leaders can do?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think that when we're talking about this, some things that have been helpful and I would like for people to be able to consider is just permissions to think about church effectiveness differently.
Oh, that's good.
I think, one term we've been using is pioneers.
Yeah.
And that came about because when early on in that first summer, we started realizing nothing is the same.
No.
I mean, I don't want to say the entire map is gone, but the trails are different.
Yeah.
And I can't count on things being where the map says they are.
Right.
Because things are different. People think differently now about church, gathering, work,
Yep.
just everything. They're rethinking everything. And we have to do the same. And so we were able to say, all right, the maps aren't completely wrong, but we don't know what is right anymore.
That's good.
We know the message is the same.
Right.
But how we convey that is more like how a missionary has to think about the gospel. When a missionary goes into a new place, they have to say, we know what our message is, but how will these people be able to hear it from their perspective? So we got to learn their perspective. Right. We got to understand it so we can communicate this effectively.
We can approach it differently.
And so when we can give ourselves permission to really go in with a missionary mindset, to go in with a pioneer mindset, to say, I know this trail says this, but let's go find out if it's still true. That is a game changer. And I know it is because it was a game changer for me.
Yes.
It was a game changer for us as a team.
100%. Right? I mean, I remember when you gave us that permission to think differently. Yeah. If you've been in ministry for a long period of time, and depending on what churches you are, you're conditioned to work in a certain way and think a certain thing. We would call them like sacred cows or whatever.
Yeah.
But, those expectations become how you do work and how you formulate
the examples
ideas.
We've seen.
Exactly. Yeah. And to think differently, because if we didn't think differently, we would be banging our heads up against the wall.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't work.
Which is what it's felt like.
Doesn't, right? Yeah. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so thinking differently was this, once you could wrap your head around breaking the habits of, no, I've got to do it and think about it this way. Once you could break through that, there's freedom to make good, calculated decisions about ministry.
Yes.
And, one of those things we talk about, like failing fast. That was one of the things about thinking differently, like try it.
Yeah.
Fail fast. If it doesn't work, great. Now you know what not to do.
That's right.
And move forward. So those things were freeing. It's hard to get there, but once you can get there and your staff can get there, then you're free to move.
Yeah.
Because as a pioneer, you got to be free to move to chart new territory.
You do. What's been interesting to me is that I've talked with senior leaders. So few of them are really able to think differently about it.
Yeah.
Like
they're stuck.
They instinctively think you're right, but there's something that's holding them back.
They're anchored.
And they're anchored. You're right. They're anchored to the old map. And we've all discovered that those old maps are just not completely accurate anymore, but we're still not sure.
Right.
But hey, talking to your board, talking to your staff team, talking to your congregation, because they all keep saying, when we get back to normal, when we get back to pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And now I'm starting to hear people talk about it differently, but they really feel that we're going to get back to, my sense is, we're going to get back to 90% of what we were.
Right.
Look, I don't know what the percentage is going to be.
Right.
But it's not going to be 100, and I don't think it's 90.
Yeah, and whatever that new percentage is, that's new growth. That's not the way it used to be.
That's right.
It's a whole new group of people, probably.
Yeah.
And we've got to chart that differently.
We got to chart it differently. Yeah. So, no, I agree. I love it. And I think being able to help people think differently, and I know that a lot of leaders are discouraged. They're not encouraged. And if we can help them stay in longer, grab hold of that calling, because I know that, hey, if you're in ministry today, it's because you love God and you love people.
Yep.
You want to be here. You want to be helpful, and you want to reach this generation.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean we know how. And we get to figure it out together.
We do. And it's about being curious. We use that word curiosity. I remember one of the big things that helped me kind of shift out of the old thinking into new thinking was I had remembered when I first got into ministry how curious I was about trying new things and doing being a pioneer. We all got into ministry early on. We were pioneering.
Yep.
And then we just got used to our old trails.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I got to go back to that and just be excited, be curious, and move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we're thinking about this whole thing, what I want to let people know is the format that we're going to be leading with is that we want to bring a perspective that's 360 degrees to a topic. And as we move forward with our next episodes, we're going to bring a topic, and I want people to be able to hear a senior leader's perspective on that topic.
Yes.
And I want people to be able to hear the staff team's perspective, because those perspectives can be very different. And I think it's very important that people understand why. And this really came out for me as we were walking through COVID, because there was an understanding before COVID about senior leads and staff and why we think about things. I'm not sure they were accurate, but we all seem to be somewhat comfortable with it.
Yep.
But through COVID, I remember I kept having to say, well, here's how I see it. Here's what I'm thinking about it. Here's what is going on. Here are the conversations I'm having with people. But it was surprising to me very often to hear how the staff team was thinking about it. And it did help me. And sometimes it confused me.
Right.
And I'm sure it was the same way for you guys, but it's still very important that we knew what each other were thinking. And I don't know about you, but staff teams I've been on in the past, we were terrible about telling each other what we were thinking.
Well,
we didn't want to share it.
It's probably because we didn't I remember like feeling I didn't have permission at other places that I worked, but coming out, working through the pandemic, you gave us permission to share because we needed to know where everybody was at.
We had to know.
And it helped shape how we move from there out of it as a team.
Yeah.
We needed to have that common understanding and solidified the team. So the 360 degree look at all, from everybody from interns on up.
Yeah.
Everybody's input was important.
They were.
And it shaped how we moved forward.
Yep.
And it allowed us to do different things a lot differently. And we feel like God's in it, and things are looking good.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but good.
It's good. It's true. I felt like that first summer I was herding cats.
Yeah.
And you guys probably were like, hey, what is going on with Craig? This guy's lost his mind.
Are you saying we're cats?
No, I'm saying that it felt like that. And then through the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure.
Honestly, we emerged a team.
Oh, man.
We're closer. We work better together than we ever have.
I agree.
Yeah. And I love that we've cried together many times throughout this whole thing, and it's been really, really good.
Absolutely.
But that happened because we were willing to be honest with each other. So it's good. And that's what we want to be able to do through this time together, this podcast, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
The ugly,
Well, this has been great. Thanks for joining me on this very first one, the why.
Yeah.
And we look forward to many more when you can join us in real time as we're having conversations about leading people, organizations, and change.